We are starting with chapter 1 of The Miracle of Love. When the flowers blooms, the bees come uninvited. We come to Maharajji's feet, implanted by our yearnings for the living spirit and drawn by his light. We come from Europe and Great Britain, the United States and Canada, Australia and South America. As Hermann Hesse said of the fellow travelers journey, in his journey to the east, each had his or her own special reason for making the journey, but all also shared a common goal. We come with our varying hues and criticisms and faith, open or closed heartedness, sensuality, and estoticisms, intellectual arrogance or humility. To each, Maharaji responded uniquely, now tenderly, now through ignoring us or sending us away, now through making much over us, now through reading the mind and heart, now through playing dumps. He did what was necessary to quit the mind and open the heart so that the thirst that had drawn us all to him could be slaked. I was traveling with a young Western fellow in India. We had come to mountains in the Land Rover I had borrowed from a friend in order to find this fellow's guru to get some help with his visa problem. I was in a bad mood having smoked too much of hashish, being in India too long and not particularly wanting to visit a guru anyway. The following is adapted from the book Be Here Now. He stopped at this temple. We stopped at this temple and we asked where the guru was. The Indian who had gathered around the car pointed to a nearby hill. In a moment he was out of the car and running up the hill. They were following him and appeared delighted to be able to see the Guru. I got out of car. Now I was additionally upset because everybody was ignoring me. I ran after them barefoot upon this rocky path, stumbling all the way. I didn't wanted to see Guru anyway, and what the hell was this all about? Around a bend of the path, I came to a field overlooking a valley, and in the field under a tree sat a man in his 60s or 70s with the blanket around him. Surrounding him were 8 or 9 Indians. I was aware of the beautiful tableau, the group, the clouds, the green valley, and the visual purity of the foothill of the Himalayas. My traveling companion ran to this man and threw himself on the ground, doing Dand Prananam, the full length prostration. He was crying and the man was patting him on the head. I was more and more confused. I stood to the side thinking, I am not going to touch his feet. I don't have to. I am not required to do that. Every now and then, this man looked up at me and twinkled a little. His glances just made me more uncomfortable. Then he looked at me and started speaking in Hindi, of which I understood very little. Another man, however, was translating. I heard him asking my friend, "You have a picture of Maharajji?" My friend nodded yes. "Give it to him," said the man in the blanket, pointing at me. That's very nice, I thought, giving me a picture of himself, and I smiled and nodded appreciatively. But I was still not going to touch his feet. Then he said, "You come in a big car?" Yes, I hadn't wanted to borrow the car in the first place, now wanting the responsibility, so the car was a source of irritation for me. He looked at me smiling and said, "You will give it to me?" I started to say what, But my friend looked up upon the ground where he was still laying the ground, laying and said, Maharaji, if you want it, you can have it. It's yours. And I said, no, now wait a minute. You can't give away David's card like that. The old man was laughing. In fact, everyone was laughing except me. Then he said, you made much money in America. I reviewed all my years as a professor and smuggler and I very proudly said yes. How much did you make? Well, I said at one time I sought to open the figures a bit further to inflate my ego. $25,000. The group converted that into rupee and everybody was awed by this figure. All of this was, of course, bragging in my part. I had never made $25,000 and he laughed again and said, you will buy a car like that for me? I remember what went through my mind at that moment. Although I had come from a family of the Jewish fundraiser, I had never seen such hustling as this. He doesn't even know my name and already he wants a $7,000 vehicle, I thought. Well, maybe, I said. The whole thing was by now upsetting me very much. And he said, take them away and give them food. And so we were given magnificent food and then we were told to rest. Sometime later, we were back with Maharaji and he said to me, come here, sit. So I sat down facing him, and he looked at me and said, you were out under the stars last night? This, of course, was the English translation of what he said. Mm. You were thinking about your mother? Yes. The previous night, the previous night, a few hundred miles away, I had gone outside during the night to go to the bathroom. The stars had been very The stars had been very bright, and I had remained outside feeling very close to the cosmos. At that time, I had suddenly experienced the presence of my mother, who had died 9 months previously of a spleen condition. It was very powerful moment, and I had told no one about it. She died last year. She got very big in the stomach before she died. Pause. Yes. He leaned back and closed his eyes and said in English, spleen. She died of spleen. What happened to me at that moment, I can't really put into words. He looked at me in a certain way, and two things happened. They do not seem like cause and effect, but rather appear to be simultaneous. My mind began to race faster and faster to try to get leverage, to get a hold of what he had just done. He went through every super CIA paranoia I had ever had. Who is he? How does he represent? Where's the button he pushes to make the files appear? Where have they why have they brought me here? None of it would none of it would gel. It was just too impossible that this could have happened this way. My traveling companion didn't know about any of the things Maharaji was saying, and I was a tourist in a car. The whole thing was just inexperienceable. My mind went faster and faster. Until then, I had had two models of psychic experience. One was, well, it happened to somebody else, and it's very interesting, and we certainly must keep an open mind about these things. That was my social science approach. The other one was, well, I am high on LSD. Who knows who knows how it really is? After all, I had had experiences under the influence of chemicals in which I had created whole environment. But neither of these criteria appeared to the situation, and as my mind went faster, I went like a computer that has been fed an insoluble problem. The bell rings and the red light goes on and the machine stops. My mind just gave up. It pumped it burnt out its criti- curiosity It seems to have an explanation. I needed something to come get closure at the rational level of there wasn't anything. At the same moment, I felt this extremely violent pain in my chest and the tremendous wrenching feeling. And I started to cry. I cried and cried and cried. But I was neither happy nor sad. It was a kind of crying I had not experienced before. I only think that the only thing I could say about it was I felt as if I had finished something. The journey was over. I had come here. Ramdas. Ram. In the words of Dada, all we think we are cherishing the Guru, but really, you see, he is cherishing us. All I knew about the hardships of India made me sure I didn't want to go there. Yet in October of 1971 I found myself at JFK airport with two friends waiting to board a plane for Bombay. A large crowd of our New York spiritual group had come to see us off, or as I suspected, to make sure we actually got on the plane. We were all three in varying states of panic, wondering what we are doing. Both the panic and the confusion were to intensify the hundredfold where we actually arrived in India. We three, like nearly all the group of the Western, we eventually joined around Maharaji, first head of him around Ramdas. Yet, through my life totally changed after the night I first heard Ramdas lecture. I did not feel drawn to go to India, particularly my stick of what going to India represent in those days made it seem for me to even consider the trip. Nor was it clear to me that the power of the awakening I had experienced was in fact a connection with Maharaji. That he could possibly be my guru. We had all heard how difficult it was to find him. And what if he sent me away and he had another's? Now, 3 years later, I was going to India, but I still hadn't the temerity to change rejections. I was going to see some South Indian saints and perhaps later visit up north. If there seemed any hope of being received, coming off the plane in Bombay, we were met by the airline representatives in India, a feat in itself, who advised us that we have a reservation on an afternoon flight to New Delhi and that ticket were waiting for us at the counter. This was a stunner, but after a 26 or 28 hours flight, we were too dazed to feel more than a mild wonder. After all, we were in India, anything could happen here. This mystery of ticket and reservation to Delhi was never solved in any reasonable way. In Delhi, we thought of going to the American Express office to ask for messages, as we had planned to do in Bombay. After all, since we were here, there must be a message. There was go to Jaipuriya Bhavan in Vrindavan. Maharaji expected soon. It was signed Balram Das. We didn't knew who that was. We learned that Vrindavan was not far from Delhi and that we could get there by an afternoon train. Somehow, we never thought of pausing in the relative westernness of Delhi. The message said go and go we did. We thereby learned the first great lesson of India: never travel by third class unreserved coach. It was an equivalent of a 3 hour ride on a New York City subway at a rush hours, with the additions of sunshine, dust, and the engine smoke pouring in the open windows. Eventually, we battled our way off the train to Mathura, and in the glowing dusk of the Indian plain, those beauty we could not even appreciate, we found a bus to take us to nearby Vrindavan. There we were put down in a large bazaar of what to all appearance was a 13th century village of winding alley full of people, rickshaws, dogs, pigs, and cows. By now it was dark, and most of the illumination came from lanterns in the shops lining the street. We asked for the directions to the Jaipuriya Bhavan in our non existent Hindi and were directed first up one alley and then down another. It grew later and the shops were beginning to close. Our panic grew with our exhaustion and hunger, for even if we came upon the hostel, we would not recognize it. For every sign was in Hindi, we began to envision ourselves huddling for the night among the cows in every doorway. Then suddenly approaching us appeared a Westerner, whom I had met the year before in California. In his in in a relief, I threw my arms around him, but he, on the an older time in India, was totally calm in the face of our emotion. Oh yes, Jaipuriya Bhavan was just there around the next bend. During the next few days, the small Westerner satsang community of spiritual seekers began gathering in Jaipuriya Bhavan, awaiting Maharaji's arrival at his Vrindavan ashram monastery. Many of them we knew from America included the mysterious Balram Das, whom we had known as a Peter. We heard his stories of Maharaji with relief and appreciation. He didn't sound so fierce and terrifying after all. Then word came there he was here. The next morning we could go to have this his darshan. I arrived at the ashram a little late with Radha, nervously clutching my borrowed sari and offering the flowers and fruits. We suc- I arrived at ashram a little late with Radha, nervously clutching my borrowed sari and offering of flowers and fruits. We circumambulated the temple and pranamed to Hanumanji, then approached the gate in the wall between the temple garden and the ashram. How well I remember that green wooden door. When we knocked, the old Chowkidar gatekeeper opened it a crack and peered out at us. Then at each time afterward, for as long as we was in India, I wondered if he would let us in. But he stepped back, pulling the door open for us. I looked through down the vista for the long veranda along the front of the ashram building. At the far end, Maharaji was sitting along on his wooden bed. When I saw his great form, my heart jumped so that I strangled against the gate. My first sight of him is still very clear in my memory. Radha had already rushed through and I ran after him. Losing my sandals along the way, it was all so simple and familiar, bowing at his feet, giving the fruits and flowers, which he immediately threw back in my lap. Weeping and laughing, Maharaji was bouncing, smiling and croning in English, Mother from America. During the first darshan, through the Maharaji spoke mainly in Hindi. I understood everything without the interpreter who stood nearby, and I recognized the love that had poured through Ramdas, and that irresistibly drawn me to India. Here was the source, Ram. Everybody else everybody else was all excited, but I was pretty spectacle about whole thing. Still I was the first one off the bus and found myself running immediately into the temple. Even though I had never been there, I somehow knew all the turns to make in order to get where Maharaji was. I came around the corner. He started bouncing up and down and exclaiming all these things in Hindi that totally confused me. I came to him and bowed down at his feet. He began to hit me really very hard. I had both a sense of great confusion and a feeling of the most incredible at oneness that I have ever felt in my life. He was so totally different from what I had expected, yet so familiar at the same time. At that moment, I felt all the suffering, all the pain from the last several years dissolved completely, and through the pain was to come back again in the future. The love I felt at the moment made it all to lost, less painful later. I had heard a I had heard a Maharaji while wandering in India, and I finally found him in Allahabad. My first meeting was in the early morning. Maharaji was in a room on a bed with Amma, Indian woman devotee, sitting before him on the floor. There was fruits on the bed, then out from under the big blanket came his hand. He took some big apples and kept bouncing them off the ma's chest. But she was totally absorbed in meditation. I sat watching, then suddenly Maharaji looked directly at me. He was like a tree. So grounded, so organic, he flipped me a banana and it landed right in my hand. I wondered what I should do with the banana. I scared a sacred object. I figured it would be best to eat it. I had come to India from United States as a devotee in a very intense religious sect. The Guru was the Guru, the final and the great savior. After only 2 weeks in his presence, I was clearly disillusioned about him and began to wonder about India on my own, still hoping to find the one true and pure Guru somewhere. Several times in my wandering, someone would tell me of Maharaji and then he was nearby. But I wondered not go, but I would not go. As I felt no particular pull, finally I was down near Bombay, still seeking the true Guru. When an old friend showed me, he looked so clear and light that before we spoke, determined to go to wherever it was he had just came from. He had just left Maharaji in Vrindavan. I packed my bags and was gone that afternoon. 24 hours later, I was before Maharaji. There was a number of Westerners there. Maharaji did not speak to me, but he kept looking very intensely at my heart chakra, psychic energy center in the heart area of the body. And what I kept hearing as a voice within me was that my search was over. I had come home. We'll continue this chapter in next video.